Welcome, everybody, to Oakland University and the Oakland Center right in the heart of campus. I'm Jason Colthorpe for this special town hall as we approach election season, talking about the issues, talking about what's on your mind. We're actually going to break down some poll numbers today as we introduce our panel. I want you to welcome Professor David Dulio, who you might recognize from our morning show, been on many times on Local 4, and his fan club. And Professor Nicole Matthew as well, our political science professors from Oakland University here. In about 15 minutes, we're going to be joined by our pollster at Local 4, Richard Zubo. We just had a new poll in the field, along with the Detroit News, where we break down each of the races, some interesting numbers. Richard always has some interesting factoids that come out of this. We'll see where we stand now exactly 1 week from this election. And there's a lot to talk about. And just to kind of give you a lay of the land here in the Oakland Center, so we're kind of in a great open space. So within the sound of my voice are tons of students who are having no part of this at the moment. Meantime, we do have a nice little audience here, but I invite any of the students who can hear me and walk around, and because I see some looking over here, over there, feel free to get involved in this conversation if you want along the way. I can't promise you won't end up on TV. It's a possibility. So keep that in mind. But most importantly, as we go along, your questions, you raise them. I want to hear them. So let's get things going. You guys ready? I warned you now. Come on. Are you ready? All right, here we go. First, is it fair to say this has been a wild election season? And I was talking to Professor Matthew ahead of time. You almost can't even look at it in its entirety with where we've been, but I'll start with you, Professor Dulio. When you look at it, do you have to break this down into almost week-by-week blocks of an election season to understand where we're at?
It sure seems like so much has happened, right? I mean, that's like the understatement of the century. But yeah, we think about what has transpired, and it's unlike any other election cycle that I can remember or that I've read about even, right? I mean, we think about the fact that the sitting president quit the race just a couple of months before the convention. We've had not one, but two assassination attempts on the other guy. And we've had these incredibly meaningful debate performances. We've had other pop-ups of crazy stuff that's happened. So I think a great way to describe this cycle is historic chaos in many ways.
Yeah. Would you agree with that, Professor Matthew?
Yes, and who would have thought that cats would play such a role in a presidential
and
election?
dogs, and the geese, I believe, too. Yeah.
Yes. Last January, we were thinking, is Trump going to be on trial? Is he going to be convicted? Is he going to be in jail by now? And a lot of those trials got delayed. We had a decision by the Supreme Court that granted some kind of immunity that might have affected those trials. And that was like a lot of the news earlier in the year was like, what's happening with these trials? Now, we're not even thinking about that anymore. Other things have come up.
I know, and when you look at the way things, people's views have changed on top of all of that, let alone as we've watched the candidates. Have you noticed how their message has changed? There was a call, I mean, after former President Trump avoided assassination attempts, there was a huge call for, hey, let's tone things down. And that lasted about 5 minutes. And then we kind of moved forward. But have you noticed how each candidate has changed their tone, their message as we've gotten closer?
Well, I think for moments we saw a very disciplined Trump in the first debate with Biden. He stayed on message. His speech at the convention was very on message. But now we're seeing a lot more kind of typical Trump veering off into tirades about this or that. His advisors, I'm sure, want him to focus solely on the economy, only on the economy. So I think what we're seeing more is a little more vintage Trump lately, but definitely moments where he was a very disciplined candidate.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think he had a real opportunity at that convention speech. And when he stuck to the teleprompter, it was good. And then, of course, he did the Trumpian thing and went off script. And that's what led it to be way too long and meandering and about irrelevant things, right? I mean, at least in terms of what the audience was looking for. And I think that has really continued. I mean, I think you're so right about the first debate performance was maybe his best ever, right? It was really good because he was disciplined and restrained, and that has gone away. I think that in some ways, Trump is just going to be Trump, and that worked before. So why not, right? It worked in 2016, so he's trying to recreate that magic. I think on the Harris side, they've been sort of hamstrung by the fact that and this isn't criticism, it's just a fact, right? She wants it both ways. She wants to at the same time be the last person in the room with the president on important decisions, but then have no accountability for the record of the Biden administration. And she's in a pickle if she wants to do that. So I think she's been trying to navigate that throughout the last couple of months. And I think that's an awkward position to be in. And I think it's been a difficult one. And that's why I think some of the criticism has come her way.
It's a tough needle to thread for sure. And as we know, it's all about the issues. And as we go along, anybody who has questions, I'd love to know what the biggest issue to you is. And we talk about that. But you guys have had the unique opportunity to hear what the students that you teach are thinking about in, I know NBC Nightly News or NBC News has been to both of your classrooms. Our show has been out a few times during debate watch parties and things like that. When you think about the issues, the campaigns ads are out there. They're hitting things across the board. We never thought we'd have this many different issues. But Professor Matthew, when Nightly News, in a segment that hasn't aired yet, but what do you think they took away from the interviews and what they learned in your classroom?
I was really impressed by the students who spoke in my class. They had very specific policy issues that they were concerned about: school shootings, abortion rights, first-time homebuyer credits, tariffs on foreign goods. Like, all these issues came up.
One of the things that I hear from students all the time is, hey, look, nobody listens to us. Nobody takes into, our opinion into consideration. Well, that's because you sit on the bench, right? And come on up, take a seat, tell us what you're interested in, tell us what's important to you. That's how you change the cycle of elected officials only listening to, let's say, more seasoned Americans rather than addressing the issues that are most important to you. So tell us what's on your mind and what you're looking for from these candidates if you have not made up your mind, if you're going to vote in this last week.
Or by a show of hands, how many of you believe that your vote's going to matter in this election? And that's just about everybody there.
That's awesome.
Yeah. How many of you believe your generation, your age group, is going to decide this election? A lot fewer, but still, that's about half as many. Nobody ever thinks, it's our group that's going to decide it, but you never know, because each candidate, we're going to talk about this with Richard Zuba, their single focus at this point is each one can win by getting their voters out. It sounds simplistic, but it's not always the easiest thing to do.
It is. It's amazing for me to think that in this election cycle where billions, with a B, billions of dollars have been spent.
Right.
And continue to be spent in the last week or so. And it is going to come down to one of the most basic, fundamental elements, blocking and tackling, if you will, in campaigns. GOTV work, field work, it is really one of the most basic and fundamental elements that has been around for centuries, really. It's something else.
Yeah.
I will say, when NBC News came to my class, every single student in the room was planning to vote except one. And by the end of the class, he had decided that he was going to vote. And this is one of the, Dave, you can probably cite the data on this, but this campus is one of the highest voter turnout campuses in the country. So students here really do care about voting.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, Nicole. And I think, too, that demonstrates the power of discussion, right? The power of conversation between peers. And I know it's difficult today because what's the old saying that there's two things you're not supposed to talk about at Thanksgiving dinner: religion and politics, right? Well, politics is probably number one on that right now because it can be so divisive. It can be so full of rancor. And yet, it's probably not ever been more needed. It's probably not ever been more critical to be able to sit down and talk about these big issues, these weighty issues that are confronting us. And if it does, it has a great effect of turning somebody's opinion from, it doesn't matter to, yeah, boy, I'm going to get out and cast a ballot.
It's interesting you say you brought up Thanksgiving dinner, and I'm walking this way in case somebody has a question. Happy to get it. But we had an etiquette expert on the morning show today talking about just how to talk politics politely without ruining Thanksgiving dinner or your next family function. And there were a lot of helpful hints. Most importantly, it's almost like it reminded me of Michigan State this weekend. If you win, maybe don't celebrate right on their field, if you know what I mean. You know, just one of those, the heck of a race. Well, we'll see how the next 4 years go. Enjoy the turkey. Does anybody have any questions out here while I'm here? You look like you were going to raise your hand there. When we look at poll numbers, at this point, do either of you guys think they make a huge difference? And we'll get into this when we talk to Richard here in a few minutes. But are people still looking at those, do you think, and thinking, okay, now I've got the information I need? Nicole?
The election's going to be close. That's what all the polls say.
Yeah.
And if you check the news tomorrow, it's going to say the same thing. It's going to be a close election. So, and in one sense, they aren't that informative because they aren't telling us who's going to win. But they are telling us that your vote's going to matter a lot compared to elections that are more lopsided.
Yeah, I think that if anybody tries to tell you that they know the outcome or they know what's going to happen, I mean, they've got a bridge to Canada, I think they want to sell you. I think that polls right now in the next week don't overreact to a particular one that comes out of the that gets reported in the press, right? Look for trends, look for shifts as they happen writ large, not from one survey from one polling outfit to another survey from another polling outfit, right? Those are just snapshots in time with a particular sample of individuals. And I'm looking forward to talking to Richard about some of this because he's got a window onto this world that none of us have. And I think he's got some interesting stuff to tell us for sure. I think, it's close and it's going to be, and that's about all we can say.
Yeah. And I want to get your guys' take on this, but first I just want to ask a few people. And I'll start with this gentleman here. Have the political ads swayed you at all? And is there any one that stands out to you?
Yes, the one in New York City, not the ad, but the Trump scared the heck out of me. I have 5 granddaughters, college age, and the crassness and just the ugliness of that particular show.
The rhetoric at Madison Square Garden you're talking.
It's really ripped my heart, How are my granddaughters going to be treated in the next 10 years?
Yeah, thank you about that. Oh, the granddaughters I was going to talk to. They look at them skedaddle. Could you feel that I was coming over here? Just actually, before you run off, and I can ask anybody else, what is the biggest issue for you guys in this election? Ensuring your futures. The two that seem to be advertised the most, I would say, on one side is immigration reform, and the other side, it's a woman's right to choose. Do you agree those are the two biggest, or are there more important issues for you personally?
I think depending on your viewpoint, those are the biggest issues currently, but as political climates change and as events happen across the world, it will...
Look at you being thoughtful. Hold on.
Oh, God. I think that it depends on the events that are happening in the world and the current political climate, as well as what is being televised on the media that everybody is seeing. That's kind of what they focus on. We can see it a lot in, I won't mention anything explicitly, but one war that happens being forgotten when another one appears. We just kind of focus on whatever is being shown in the media.
Can I ask you one thing? And remember, everybody in Metro Detroit is watching you right now. They're not really just... but what's the most important thing to you? This election, the most important issue?
Just knowing that our country is going to be safe in the future and that all of us as people and students are in good hands.
Security. Thank you. All right, you guys are excused. Yes, thank you. See how painless that is? I could feel a couple people leaving as we said, hold on, do you question or comment? You can't itch anything or anything like that. You sure? Well, while I got you, what's the most important issue?
I think currently it's just, there's that same thing. I'm just an echo of them, but it's just being secure in our future and knowing that our next commander-in-chief has our best interests in mind, not just as a student, but as a civilian.
Yeah. That's a great concern. And to you, the professors up here, when you see all the ads, for most of us, it just becomes at some point, it's almost white noise. One finishes, the next one cancels out what you just saw almost instantaneously. But have any stuck out to you? Do you think any of these stick with voters?
Well, I did some homework last night, and I watched the local news and Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune.
We appreciate that.
Just to see what kind of ads were out there, and it's scary, guys. On one side, democracy's ending. On the other side, we're going to be murdered and raped by illegal immigrants.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
very extreme out
is.
there.
And I'm, I guess, maybe desensitized to it. I watch maybe a lot more local news than Nicole does. And it's Harris, Trump, Slotkin, Rogers, Slotkin, Trump, Harris. I mean, it's one after the other, and they all run together for me. But I think the overall effect is that by now we know, I think, where the campaigns are focusing their efforts, right? Trump is economy and immigration, and Harris is abortion, right? Mainly. And that's because, I mean, we can go to political science literature here, thankfully, right? I mean, we can talk about John Petrosik's theory of issue ownership and Stephen Medvick's theory of deliberate priming, which really are, they're not simplistic. They simplify what campaigns are trying to do, which is they talk about issues where they have an advantage over their opponent. And that is very clear this election cycle, where the Trump side and Republicans have an advantage in terms of perception on issues about the economy and immigration, and Harris and her side has an advantage on abortion. And so that's what they're focusing on.
My favorite part, by the way, is the exaggerations. What goes as a yacht versus what looks like my grandpa's boat that he used to have. But no, continue.
One thing that surprised me was ads for Michigan State House seats, which is very unusual that you'd have state legislative districts running ads on TV, and that speaks to how important the race is. There's 2-seat margin for Democrats in the Michigan House, and the amount of money that's flowing in from groups to fund these ads. So that really surprised me to see so many local ads.
I saw some some local Texas political ads that made it on a national football game broadcast last weekend. So I heard somebody talking back here. Yes, sir.
I was chuckling a little bit, but because I've seen the same thing. I was like, oh, I don't know who half these state reps are, and I've done some research on them. It's interesting how much money has flown in. But I guess bringing it back more to macro level, talking federal, Michigan obviously has been in the spotlight for not just presidential, but I mean, can we say that the state's also going to be a major pivot for House and Senate? I mean, obviously Senate, sure, but House, I mean, there's a small margin there where this is historically outside of the Tri-County area, and in Grand Rapids, a historically red-leaning state, more red, districts after the redistricting. I mean, are we going to see the state even play a role with, how the Speaker of the House and Congress turns out?
Absolutely. We have 3 competitive U.S. House seats in Michigan out of the 20 most competitive seats, and that's a lot to do with the redistricting commission that made a lot of these seats more competitive. And we have 3 seats in play. The current margin in the House is 4 seats. So Michigan's going to be a big part of whether Republicans maintain control of the House, whether Democrats maintain control, and how wide the margin is, because that matters how much the speaker can do.
Yeah, I think Michigan has got the most unique set of competitive races in the country, right? No other state has got what we have when it comes to, when we think about the presidential race, goes without saying, but an open U.S. Senate seat that is very competitive. I saw some numbers today that have it tied. But again, that's one of those that's close, right? And then the 2 of those 3 House races are both open seats. And which are incredibly competitive, and you see money pouring into those as well. So Michigan is poised to be a majority maker in terms of all of those 3 federally elected branches.
The Senate race numbers are a perfect lead into Richard Zuba, who is coming up next. We're going to take a quick time out. I see your question, sir. I promise we'll get to them all right after this. here in Rochester, Michigan, talking with our distinguished panel of political science professors, David Dulio and Nicole Matthew. And now I want to welcome Richard Zuba, our pollster at Glengarriff Group. And Richard, great to see you. The last poll in the field before the election, the Local 4 Detroit News poll. What stood out most to you with this last one before voters go to the poll on Election Day? I know some ballots obviously already being cast.
Well, I think a couple of things stood out. First of all, we have Harris up by 3. We have Slotkin up by 4. Particularly in that presidential race, it's been close. It's still very much within the margin of error. But what really sticks out in these numbers, and they have for the last month and a half, is just how genderized this election has become. We see Harris with more than a 20-point lead amongst women. We see Trump with more than a 20-point lead amongst men. This is by far the most genderized presidential election we've seen. And part of that here in Michigan is because we are the epicenter of American politics right now. So we are getting the full throttle of everything. The entire campaign. Enjoy your time in the center of the spotlight.
I don't know if how the numbers bear it out, but have you noticed that candidates now going for groups, trying to get votes out of groups they've never even acknowledged before?
Well, in a race this close, this is all about turnout and it's all about margins. And the word we should be focused on is margins. And what I mean by that is, for example, we see 2 groups really playing a key role here. For the Harris campaign, it's women without a college education. This is a group Donald Trump needs, and he has won in the past. And right now, we have Harris with a slight lead in that group, largely because we're seeing the abortion issue playing there. On the reverse of that, we see Trump aggressively trying to court black men. And that is traditionally a very Democratic group. We have seen past surveys where we see almost 20% of black men, I would say, flirting with Donald Trump. We're not seeing that in this survey. We saw the Democrats go back in really hard into communities of color and work very hard to win back those votes. Remains to be seen if that's the case on Election Day, but right now it seems Democrats have made their mark in getting those voters back.
In the past, Donald Trump has underperformed in the polls and obviously done much better on Election Day. How do you see that playing out this time?
Well, first of all, let's talk about 16 and 20. 16 was the full throttle, the first time we saw a presidential campaign undergoing this realignment amongst voters that we have taking place. And many pollsters, myself included, were not paying attention to non-college voters and what a difference there was between college-educated and non-college. We are now paying attention to that. The other thing that happens as these elections go on is you learn from past elections. You adapt your modeling to what you've learned. And in this case, for example, our latest survey in Michigan, I took our demographics for this survey and overlaid them on our last 2020 survey. And it showed that Biden would have won by 1 point in Michigan using the modeling we're currently using. So we're using a much more conservative model right now, which I think is important. Having said that, this all comes down to Election Day.
Yeah.
And who's going to actually turn out? And we can't answer that question. We don't know that. We can see what intentions are, but intentions aren't actual votes.
Jump into the Senate race for me real quick. I know we have new numbers there. Am I right in seeing that it seems like Rogers keeps closing the gap? And I also noticed his favorable, unfavorable, he's underwater on that, and that's opposite of Slotkin. Is that correct?
Well, so we started polling this race at the end of August after the conventions, and we had Slotkin winning by 8. But the reason for that was because Rogers had just come off the primary campaign. He had work to do to consolidate his base of Republican votes. He's done that. We expected he would do that. He has done that. This is a battle very much over the center, but laid over that are the contours of the presidential race. You know, we have Slotkin up by 4. We had her up by 3.6% at the beginning of October. She does extremely well as a candidate speaking to independent voters. And she has a lead here with independents. Michigan is often decided by independent voters, particularly in elections where there's a whole lot of turnout, which we expect to have happen. I do think, again, the path for Mike Rogers here is to hang on tight to Donald Trump and hope Donald Trump wins Michigan and moves him over the top.
David, you got a question?
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up? Hi,
Absolutely.
Richard. It's Dave Dulio.
Hi, Dave.
One of the things that I found striking in this whole cycle is Gallup has reported some data that their numbers have Republicans in 2024 taking a lead over Democrats in terms of party identification. Do you see any, I mean, I guess number one, what do you think of that as somebody who has got his pulse on the finger of the electorate? And number two, if you think that that is accurate, do you see that reflected in Michigan at all? And then I guess as a third one, what impact could that have on Election Day and even the pre-election polls that are trying to model that turnout?
Well, let's just start with Michigan. And one of the challenge, both as a pollster and any pollster that comes into Michigan to poll that doesn't know the state, that they have to deal with is we don't have party registration here. That makes it very difficult to fully gauge where voters are. I mean, give you an example. When you poll Pennsylvania, you can look exactly by county and know there are 33,133 Republicans versus 32,057 Democrats and 14,000 independents. You can't do that in Michigan. So you have to make some assumptions in the polling and the sampling. Having said that, I'm not seeing a shift in Michigan in terms of how people are viewing themselves. The one thing we have to do is look at independent voters and ask the question, okay, who do you generally vote for? Because a lot of people will tell you they're independents. And when you push them a little harder, you find out that they actually do, in fact, lean to one side or another. In Michigan, right now, it's very even. Maybe a 1-point advantage for the Democrats, but it's a very even party break here in Michigan. We saw that in 20, we saw it in 22. We're seeing that again in 24 here.
Any questions from the crowd for Richard Zuba, by the way? We've got one right here.
Margaret Brenner on CBS about a week ago, she had a special about turning points in presidents, and Lincoln, of course, was one when the nation was most severely divided, and FDR was one. When she talked about FDR, she mentioned that, or her guess, that 1933, during the Depression, when he was elected, that the government and the banks wanted him to have dictatorial powers to pull things around, and he refused because he believed in democracy. And that could have been a different turning point, even though it's prior to World War II, which was another turning point, I guess one might say. But do you see now with Mr. Trump, who seems to also appears to want dictatorial powers and even extending a term beyond what the limit is now if he does get in, do you see a problem there with the negative turning point if Mr. Trump gets in?
Well, let me just say that democracy is a fragile thing. And we tend to think, oh my God, it's always been here. Well, guess what? It hasn't been in the world for very long. And we need to always remember that. I think one of the things we've seen throughout history are both Republicans and Democrats understood that democracy needed to be fought for, protected. We're always going to have our policy squabbles. We can't ever forget that. That's kind of the gist of democracy is we argue, we go back and forth, give and take. But there's got to be some basics. There's got to be some guardrails around democracy. And I think one of those fundamental guardrails is the protection of our voting systems. And, those are being threatened. We did work several weeks ago with Governors Blanchard and Engler, two Republican Democratic governors of Michigan, one who beat the other in one of the closest Michigan elections ever. And they are working together, frankly, to help voters understand that our voting systems are secure. They are fair and they are accurate. And we did a lot of work on that to understand how voters felt. one of the things we found is the overwhelming majority of Michigan voters don't have any idea what is in place to protect the accuracy and fairness of the vote. And when they do, their confidence in democracy skyrockets in the vote. But they don't know, and they don't know because they've never had to know, frankly. This is something we've always taken for granted in this country. And that's why I come back to, it's fragile. We can't take things for granted. And we always have to, regardless of what side of the aisle you come from, be willing to protect those basic elements of democracy and protect your right to vote.
Yeah, very well said, and I wouldn't quarrel with a word of that. I would just add that, our system has checks and balances built into it that are part of that guardrail system, right? Where not one branch of government has too much power over the others. And I think we saw that actually during the first Trump administration when he did some things with executive action and the courts came in and said, can't do that, right? So, and in fact, President Biden has felt that same smack of the wrist where the executive goes too far and the courts come in and say, no, we're not doing that, right? Mm-hmm. And, let's not forget the Congress is the branch that has the power of the purse. The president has a little bit of discretion, but Congress spends your money, not the president. So I think that it's good to remind ourselves that the checks and balances that are there are in place to put guardrails on any one individual or any one branch.
Richard, I'll let you go on this one real quick. You always talk about Michigan independence, decide the race here in the state. We've been talking here with a lot of the students and people in attendance about what the issues that matter to them. We've heard security. We know what the national kind of campaigns are, border security, a woman's right to choose. What's standing out as most important to Michigan independence?
The economy, by far. There's no question. And this is, I think, one of the challenges the Harris campaign has had is there is a general dissatisfaction with the economy. One of the things we see, however, when we talk, for example, in focus groups with both Republicans and Democrats, is they tend to have off-ramps where they blame the other party for the bad economy. Independents are different. And specifically, independent voters look at what's in front of them, what they're dealing with, what they're facing. Frankly, I think Governor Whitmer here in Michigan is particularly attuned and understands those kind of kitchen table issues that independents really care about. You're seeing the Harris campaign trying to address them. You're seeing the Trump campaign very much trying to exploit their advantage on that. In the end, I do think their economy is going to play a major factor, but we're seeing abortion playing just a really large role with female voters. We asked the question, for example, on Roe v. Wade, if a candidate opposes Roe v. Wade, does that make you more or less likely to vote for them? Amongst female voters, 45% of women said it made them much less likely to vote for the candidate. So it is a motivating factor with women, particularly women independents. Male independents really are focusing on the economy.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
Sorry, Richard, it's Dave again. How many independents are there? I mean, or maybe I should ask it a different way. How many undecided voters are there?
Okay, those are two very different
questions.
issues.
I bit my tongue as soon as independent came out. I knew that's not what I wanted to ask.
So just starting with independents, we're looking at about 17 to 18% of the state are true independents that you can't get to lean one way or the other. But in terms of who is undecided, in the presidential race, we've gone anywhere from 1% to 2%. And frankly, I question whether they're really undecided or whether they're going to vote even. People know where they're going to go here. That's why this is a turnout election. This is about who they turn out on the margins.
And we also have this interesting mix of third-party candidates here in Michigan where Jill Stein is there, but so is RFK Jr., even though he hasn't he doesn't want to be, but he's endorsed Trump, but he's still on the ballot.
And it matters.
For sure, right? So, I mean, what impact, are you seeing anything where maybe some potential Trump voters are confused by RFK's presence in your surveys, and maybe they think that he's not running anymore, but he's still on the ballot? I mean, can you assess the state of the third party factor?
Sure. Any survey that comes out that does not have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the list of candidates is a flawed survey, because we are consistently seeing him taking 3 to 4% of the vote here in Michigan.
Yeah.
And it is coming from independents and leaning Republicans. And there's a reason the Republicans are trying so hard to get him off the ballot here in Michigan, or did try. We see that he filed another case on this. Everything we can see is that Kennedy continues to marginally hurt Trump more than he does Harris. Conversely, we have Jill Stein, who clearly has a constituency with the very far left, but we see her getting about what she normally gets, which is 1 to 1.5%. Cornel West is on the ballot. He is not getting many votes that we can assess. And his voters are the least likely to vote. Their motivation to vote is particularly low. The same with Jill Stein voters. Their motivation to vote isn't anywhere near as high as Trump or Harris voters, or for that matter, Kennedy voters. So keep your eye on Kennedy to see if he gets that 3 to 4%, or if it disintegrates and they actually end up choosing one of the other two candidates.
Nicole?
The evolution of Kennedy's candidacy is fascinating. Initially, everyone thought he's going to hurt the Democrats. Kennedy's a Democrat name, and most of his policy positions are pretty liberal, other than the vaccine, being opposed to vaccines. And then over the course of the campaign, it became clear that he's hurting Trump. And then he makes a deal with Trump this summer. I don't know what office he's going to be appointed to if Trump wins. But very fascinating how the perception of his candidacy totally changed.
Yeah.
I think it's important for us, when we talk about Kennedy, also to realize there were a lot of voters in the winter primary who did not vote for Donald Trump and voted for Nikki Haley. And I think some of those voters are looking for a parking place where they don't want to vote for Harris, but they don't want to vote for Trump, because Trump has not brought all those Nikki Haley voters back into the fold. And I think that's giving some of those voters a place to go.
Richard, thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it as always. Richard Zuba, everybody, from Glenn Gariff Group, our pollster for Local 4 and the Detroit News. See you soon. We're going to take one more quick break, and then we're going to get to all questions right after this. Welcome back to Oakland University, everybody, here for our Local 4 Plus Town Hall, taking questions as we finish up here. And I'm starting with the lovely lady in the back.
Thank you. My name is Maxine, and I am a grandmother and a great-grandmother. And I'm just looking for the future for them, you know, about the rights for abortion, of course. And then I read some of that Project 2025, which does not, you know, agree with me. I don't know about any of you all, if you all read it. It's really terrible. It really is. So I'm just saying, I don't hear about that on the news or anything anymore, about that 2025. And then this is a convicted felon, 34 counts. We don't hear about that. Is that legal? If my son had 34 counts of convicted, I don't think he could run.
No, he could.
He can run for president.
Yeah, that doesn't, he could be in prison and still be president, yeah. And I know you got, yeah.
She mentioned Project 2025.
Yeah.
I got 4 pieces of mail from the Republican Party of Michigan telling me Trump is not in favor of 2025, which just surprised me so much that they felt like they needed to address that somehow this policy paper from some think tank became a kitchen table conversation for people. Is just kind of surprising.
Well, you know, the Harris campaign and its allies did an excellent job tying him to that. And even in Trump saying, I don't have anything to do with it, I don't like it, it's not what, you know, and yet the messaging worked to make him, you know, like that.
And he may not. The unfortunate part for Trump was that it was written by several people that some had been in his cabinet and had been affiliated with him in the past, so he could be guilty by association.
Well, it's easy to stick on him because he's a candidate without a lot of policy papers on his website. He's not running like a Hillary Clinton campaign where I have all these plans. He's got concepts of plans. So then when people say, no, this is the playbook, this is what's going to happen, then that sort of thing is easy to stick on him because we don't have any other policy positions to stick on him.
Next question over here.
You guys mentioned that a lot of people don't know about the voting protections. So I was wondering, since inquiring minds want to know what those might be.
Security, you mean like when you cast your ballot, or?
Yeah, that.
Well, I mean, I
is the one big
probably
issue we
don't
haven't
even
talked
know as
about.
much about it as I should, right? I mean, but I would say that, if we're thinking about absentee ballots, because that's the one that really has been attacked before, right? There is an incredible process that a ballot goes through before it gets counted, and including signature matching, where there are people in the clerk's office that take your absentee ballot, the absentee ballot envelope, and match it with the signature on it and match it to another signature that you have provided to the office to make sure that somebody else hasn't just gotten your ballot and sent it in, right? I mean, so for me, that's one of the biggest ones, and it is such an incredible time sucker, right? I mean, that's why it takes so long to count those absentee ballots, is because there's this really lengthy process that they have to go through.
And they don't start until
And at
election
every
day.
step of the way, there are Republicans and Democrats, workers, looking at the signatures, looking at the ballots when they come in. And I've worked the last 4 elections. And, the last election, someone came and they weren't able to get out of the car and come in because they didn't have a wheelchair with them. Well, we had to send a Republican poll worker and a Democratic poll worker to their car to bring them the ballot. That's the level of security that you have. You have people from both parties who are watching everything that's going on, and you're not going to see any issues that are founded in a bunch of ballots suddenly arriving and being added to something, or these machines not counting the ballots correctly.
And Nicole, let me ask you as a follow-up, as a poll worker, have you found that the recent charges that the Attorney General's office filed against some people for voting twice leads you to believe that we are hyper-focused on security this time around?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it maybe got... first of all, it should never have happened. When someone comes in and they've already cast an absentee ballot on the computer, when you scan their license, it will say, do not issue. Ballot has been received,
Right.
do not issue. And if someone has received the ballot, the ballot's been mailed to them, but they haven't turned it in yet, we can't issue them a ballot until we call the clerk's office
Right.
and make sure that they have not received a ballot from that person. And then the clerk will mark down that they are voting at the precinct, and if a ballot comes in the mail, they will discard that ballot. So there's a lot of protections, and that was people were not following the rules when they allowed this person to vote
Right.
twice, but I think it might have been a mistake. Maybe she mailed the ballot a whole month before the election, forgot that she had already voted. Could have been a simple mistake, but that's the kind of environment we're in, where people are
Right.
like hyper focused on these sort of things.
Just to button that up, the county prosecutor, that's what they chalked it up to. But in looking, all those red flags did go off, which is why the AG ended up filing charges. That's what she said. Did that answer your question? And if it did, what is the security part of the election that worries you the most? Or what are you most concerned about when it comes to ballot security?
Really, it was just that a lot of people don't know it, you guys had mentioned, so I figured it was a good time that people hear that and that I would have that information so that I could spread that, because there's a lot of mistrust, I would say, in that area, so it's good to have the information.
Yeah, and really thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely.
Because it is a huge issue, right? And I would say that the lack of information leads to assumptions being made, right? So it's I don't know who it falls on, whether it's up to the public to make themselves more informed, or if there's ways that we can provide that information in a better way. I hope it would go a long way to solving those problems.
Next question right here.
Hi, my name is Morgan. I'm a student here at OU, and I wanted to ask a question about schooling on the election day, because it is so crucial for students to go out and vote. And like we said, we see a lot of these politicians are focused on issues for, like Professor Dulio said, more seasoned issues. And so, if we want things to have more focus on us, like school safety or abortion, anything like that, the students need to be able to go out and vote. And one important thing of that is, like, we still have school on election day. So it can be hard, especially for, like, OU, that's a commuter school, Some people are driving far to go and vote. So I think it's really important that not only the students, but even the teachers have that day off, so it can make it easier and maybe encourage more people to be like, hey, I have this day off. Why? To go and vote.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit why we've had the absentee ballot push to make it easier for people to do that. But thoughts?
Yeah, I
Nicole?
think that used to be more of an issue than it is now, because you currently have so many options to vote not on election day. You can receive an absentee ballot in the mail, fill it out in your own time, send it back. You can, we now have 10 days of early voting where you can go to, there's different satellite locations. There was one in the community center across the street from me. I happened to walk by a very long line on Sunday afternoon. Tons of people doing an early ballot on Sunday. And you can also, on the day of the election, if you're not registered, you don't know where your polling place is, go to the city clerk in your city. You can register that day. You can receive an absentee ballot, fill it out, and hand it right back to the clerk, right up to election day. And this is all new since in the last couple years.
Good question. Or were you just trying to get out of class, by the way? Just kidding. Next question's right here in the front row.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. And I also work elections too, and I am amazed the steps of security and double check and triple check, and it's a task. Yeah. Question is, all these ads, radio, TV, are so negative. Did anybody, why do the writers keep doing that? Because we want to shut it off, rather than taking a positive stance on themselves, promoting that, and somebody say, there, I feel good with this person. Why do they not do that? And then I have another
This
question
is the
for you.
easiest question all day.
Oh, good.
Because they work. That's why they,
Really?
Absolutely.
The
They would not
negativity.
spend the hundreds of millions of dollars that are spent on negative ads if they didn't work.
Well, if you saw all positive ads, you would not know as much about the candidates. You would know that they have a lovely family and a lovely dog and their kids are really cute. But you would not know the same issue content that you get from negative ads. And yes, a lot of them are over the top. The second reason, though, is that a lot of ads are run by outside groups. They aren't allowed to coordinate directly with candidates' campaigns. So they can't say, hey, Kamala Harris, come, we're going to shoot an ad and we're going to play that ad of you. They can't do that, so they're left with like kind of public footage of candidates. So it's much easier for them to make a negative ad than a positive ad if it's being paid for by outside groups. Some of the candidates are getting around this by posting videos on their YouTube channel of them talking at a campaign event and then like making that footage publicly available for some of these outside groups to use. But outside groups, almost all of their ads are very negative.
As long as they're accurate. Dr. Dulio, it was 8 years ago that I first heard you speak before that election, and it was fascinating, the history of voting from the past 100 years. You said, in spite of the polls at this time, it was just a week or two like we are now ahead of the election, and you said the polls show Hillary ahead by, I believe it was 10 or 11% at that time, and you said you kind of predicted or expected a different outcome. Is there anything you'd like to say today? And I know polls are interesting and a whole nother subject.
And also, what do you think about the spread of the Lions game this Sunday while you're predicting? I mean, it's something we can all benefit from.
Right. I don't remember making that prediction, but I'll take the credit for it. It's close. It's a coin flip. I think, too, that you'll see in the next week a lot about so-and-so's chances of winning, and you'll see it from Nate Silver and 538, and The Economist has got some good data out there. But, if it's, just as an example, if it's 55-45 Trump in those predictions, right, that's still, you flip a coin 100 times, it comes up Harris 44, right? So we got to be careful with how people interpret the chances of winning. because it really is remaining incredibly close. And I can't remember an election like this where it is so close, so late in every one of the battleground states. Every one of them is within a point or two. It's really unbelievable.
Really is. Couple more questions. I'm getting the hard wrap, but I'm hurrying. Hang on, guys.
Thank you. For either of you guys, agree or disagree with this statement that Americans are becoming more divided or unified with the upcoming election?
Quick answers if you can, guys.
Divided.
Divided.
Sir.
Yeah, so my name's Cullen, and I'm just wondering about January 6th and if the election itself will be legitimized. I mean, we've seen Trump. He still won't say he lost the last election. Do you think he's going to have a similar route with this election if he does lose?
I don't know what Trump in particular is going to do, but even in the last election, we found out there were guardrails we didn't know about. We found out that we have boards that certify votes that, we didn't even know that existed, and we had a Republican say, okay, I will do the right thing and certify this vote in Michigan because it is they won more votes. We had the Speaker of the Michigan House and the Speaker of Michigan Senate, both Republicans, conservative Republicans, flew to D.C., met with Trump at the hotel and said, no, we can't choose different electors just because you want. We had the Secretary of State of Georgia say, no, I can't find 12,000 votes for you. So, and we had the Vice President say, no, it's not my duty to overturn the election. So we had, Trump did what he wanted to do, but other people did the right thing and said, this is who won.
Two more quick ones.
Social Security and the debt. So if I think if Trump's elected, he's going to go after Social Security. Heard a lot of people my age, because the Republican conscience is the debt. What are we going to do about the debt? And I care about the debt too. So I haven't heard a lot about both of those issues. Dave, how would you?
Because they're hard to talk about, right? I mean, and they're complex. I think the quick answer is there's a reckoning coming with regard to Social Security in the next decade, and we're not even close to being able to address it.
I'm getting the hard wrap. I promise this is the last one.
Sure. As educators, how do you deal with the level of misinformation, disinformation, and delusional attitudes from voters?
Delusional.
You just got to fight through the clutter, right? And bring it back to something that's grounded in facts that are demonstrable, right? And say, hey, look, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And here's what those are, right? And you have to do a good job of laying a foundation to be someone who's trustworthy for students to understand that, okay, this professor wouldn't steer me in the wrong direction when it comes to what is and what is not.
I think the best practice that we as educators can do is force students to say, what is the best argument for each side? I do this in my classes. I assign them to be on this side of the case or that side of the case, and they have to make the best argument. Most of them want to go to law school anyway. But that's how you learn what is the best argument, and that's also how you learn what you really believe is, can I answer the best argument of the other side?
My debate class opened my eyes. I fell in love with that class, being forced to argue two sides of an argument, of an issue. Really good stuff. Professors, thank you so much. Nicole Matthew, David Dulio, we appreciate you. Of course, Richard Zubo, we appreciate him. And for everybody who stopped and engaged, we appreciate you too. Thank you very much. If you haven't already voted, go to the polls next Tuesday and make your voices heard. I'm Jason Colthorpe. Thanks for watching here on Local 4 Plus.